Selamünaleyküm abi.
Aleykümselam.
Abi,
Her şey olur.
hamdolsun çok şükür. Allah razı olsun. Abi size bir link attım WhatsApp'tan.
Şey mi?
Zoom link.
Attınız,
Evet,
değil mi?
Zoom linki abi. Hı hı.
Ya şöyle benim onu şeyde açabilmem lazım. Sistemi kuruyorum şu anda ben de. Telefona attınız değil mi? WhatsApp'tan attınız.
Fark etmez abi. İstediğiniz yere atayım. WhatsApp'a attım da başka yer istiyorsanız oraya da atayım abi.
Bir saniye.
Hani e-mail'e de atabilirim. Telefona da atabilirim.
Sistemi bir kurayım. Tam 7'de mi başlıyoruz?
Evet abi. Hani en azından Zoom ses denemesi falan yapsak. Çünkü bazen daha önceden öyle oluyor. Ses denemelerinde problem yaşıyoruz abi.
Mac'ten bağlanacağım da.
Tamam abi.
Onun şeyi falan daha kaliteli. Ses sistemi vesaire.
Şu an 4 kişi beklemede bekliyor abi. Yani ben beklemeye aldığım için insanları.
Evet, şimdi şey verir misiniz bana? Meeting numarasını.
Abi direkt link yollamıştım. Meeting numarasını istiyorsunuz abi.
Evet.
Bir dakika abi. Şöyle.
Meeting ID yani.
Aa. Abi 800 bu ne ya meeting abi? Evet. Bir dakika ben normal linki direkt yolladığım için meeting ID'yi nereden bulacağım onu anlamışım.
Şeyden tıklarsam yanlış telefonda açılacak o çünkü Mac'te yapalım daha iyi olur.
Invite contacts, copy them. Abi
Normalde bana attığınız şeyde olması lazım. Ben buradan bakayım bende görünüyorsa ben de girebilirim.
Tamam abi. ID abi şu 827
Bir saniye. Evet. 827
8706
8706
7114.
7114.
Password'ü var abi bir de.
Bakayım join deyince ne olacak?
Password.
Evet, password
181
181
531.
531. Kim? Moderatör kim olacak?
Christina.
Tamam.
Şeyden de abi Dick diye bir eleman var. Dick Monk diye World Affairs Council'dan. O var şu anda beklemede. Onu alıyorum abi isterseniz.
Password soruyor.
Abi password'ü yine mi soruyor?
Allah'ım.
Bir dakika abi hemen invite diyorum e-mail. Abi password'ü 181 531. Oldu mu abi?
Update istiyor ya. Dur bakalım.
Chris Havner, Peter Cohen. Bizim Türkiye'ye katılan güzel insanlar var şu an görüyorum. Abi tamam mı? Milleti ona göre 10 kişi, 11 kişi geç. Abi bilmiyorum ki hani siz Abi tamam. ID numarası abi 827 8706 7114. 7114. Password'ü 181 531. ...531. Size WhatsApp'tan dağıttım aynı zamanda. Oldu mu? Tamam. Abi şimdi bakıyorum. Siz var mısınız? Siz geldiniz abi. Kabul ediyorum sizi. Tamam mı? Harika. Hadi görüşürüz. Abi. Selamünaleyküm abi.
Aleykümselam. Nasıl?
Harika. Harika.
Problem yok, değil mi?
Background falan çok güzel abi. Herkesi kabul ediyorum abi şimdi.
Kabul ediyor musun yoksa şu açıyı bir ayarlayayım, bir tam düzgün değil herhalde.
Tamam. 2 dakika var. 15 kişi şu an bekliyor. Hani kaybolmasını istiyorum abi kimse.
Tamam.
Alıyorum abi milleti. Yok, güzel abi. Çok güzel. Aldım abi.
Hello.
Hello guys.
Hello.
As I see all of the friends. Great.
Hey, Yakov.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, hello.
Hello. Hello to everyone. We can start or how we do? Actually.
I think let's see where Akif is. I think we might just wait 2 or 3 more minutes just to make sure.
Okay. Akif Bey, did you get these pictures that
Right
I sent you
there.
to share?
I did get, yes.
So I sent, I guess, 3 pictures.
Mhm.
2 Ahmeds
Correct.
and the result of a poll, recent public poll.
Yes. I get
And the figures about the purge.
Mhm.
3.
Yes.
So we can use the first one first. I mean the picture of 2 Ahmeds
Okay, that's fine.
when we have appropriate time.
Christina, I think you are going to lead the night, and so it's a 7. Would you like to take a couple more minutes?
Yeah, I was thinking 1 or 2 more
Okay.
minutes. I just want to make sure that I think we have everybody on here. Do you have any left in the waiting room?
No, I got everyone to
Okay.
the main room from the waiting room.
Very good.
Right.
Sounds good.
Yeah. To
So
my home.
Christina, can you raise your hand? Just
I
to
think when Krishna speaks, the speaker, the active speaker's picture should be seen on the main screen, right?
Well, I should at least light up in yellow. You should see me light up in yellow. On my computer, it's the 3 of us in a row.
Onward.
Hey, Susie. Susie.
Okay, we have 28 participants already, so I'll go ahead and I think, are we good to start?
Yeah, we can.
I believe so, yeah, it's about 7:02. All right, welcome everybody. We want to welcome you to tonight's event. It's we have Dr. Balici here, and he's going to be speaking to us. It's about 4 years later since the Turkish coup happened, 4 or 5 years later, I believe. And he's going to speak to us and let us know how it looks now. We've had a lot of people ask questions about how Turkey is now, and we were wanting some updates. And so we'd like to thank Dixon Monk with the World Affairs Council in Colombia for partnering with us on this event and helping to share the information. And I believe, Keith, I forget if you were going to say something for a minute.
Sure. Again, good evening, everyone. It's so pleasure to see many friends here virtually. In fact, it seems, yeah, I have missed all of you guys. I'm looking forward to see you in person and at least have coffees or teas, Turkish teas or baklavas, whatever we can share in the best way, in the sweetest way. So I want to thank Dick Monk. So Dixon, thanks so much as on behalf of the World Affairs Council of Colombia to partner with Atlantic Institute. You are doing great jobs over there. And in fact, we have cooperated together for different events so far. So thank you again for partnering with us. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And in fact, Mr. Bilogi, so our tonight's distinguished speakers, I happened to host him at my home. I was so honored and privileged to meet with his family. Most of you know about him. He was the chief editor for Zaman newspaper, which was Turkey's largest newspaper. I mean, largest circulated newspaper before it was confiscated by Erdogan's government. So he graduated from one of the best college in Turkey, like the Harvard of Turkey. Let's put it in this way, it's called the Bosporus College University. He's a brilliant person, and but unfortunately he had to escape his country with his family. Now he is here in the United States as political asylum seeker, and he lives in Virginia area. So he lost his position, he lost his everything in Turkey. More than anything, I think the newspaper that he spent, most of his time around the newspaper, and they did great job. He lost the newspaper there. Definitely, beyond of his newspaper, Zaman, Turkey lost the freedom of media and the freedom of speech. So as most of you know about Turkey. I mean, I see the majority of you have been in Turkey as a friends. Some of you went to Turkey together. I was so honored to be, with you guys going to Turkey when the times were really good. So I know that since the coup happened in 2016, so it like 4 years passed upon that one, and we have many things has changed in Turkey. And I'm sure as the friends that you are curious what's going on in Turkey, what has changed, what is the possibility in the short and long term, what might happen in Turkey again. So, it's a personal level. I have been asked those type of questions, and I thought that one of the best way during this COVID-19 to create a virtual event to get one of the best speakers to really address to your questions. So therefore, when I approached to Mr. Bilogi and asked him if he would really speak to our guest about Turkey since 2016, and so he accepted. I was so glad that he really accepted our invitation, and I really thank you, Mr. Bilogi, for being our guest speaker tonight. So that's kind of really
That was Emerson Smith who went away.
a brief way to explain the purpose of tonight. But before we start with Mr. Bilogi, Dixon, would you like to say a couple of things on behalf of the World Affairs Council?
Sure. Thank you, Keith. I appreciate it. And welcome back, Mr. Bilogi. Good evening, everyone. It's really great to see all of you, and great to see some new faces. Thanks for joining us tonight. For those of you that don't know, the Columbia World Affairs Council, a member of the World Affairs Councils of America and Sister Cities International, is a nonprofit fostering international relationships and awareness in the Midlands of South Carolina. To learn more about us, check out our website, columbiaworldaffairs.org, or follow us on social media at COLA WAC. I'll put it in the chat box. But very pleased to be partnering again with the Atlantic Institute and to be connected with our friends in Greenville. Hi, Christina. Thrilled to have Mr. Bilogi back. He spoke with the World Affairs Council in Colombia back in April of 2017, giving a moving presentation on his plight fleeing Turkey and the sacking of the Zaman, and the importance of free press to a democracy. It was just prior in late February of that year that President Trump first used the phrase "enemy of the people" when referring to the media, and subsequently blocked several major broadcasters like BBC, New York Times, CNN from a White House press briefing. So it was with trepidation that day that we listened to Mr. Belishi's remarks on the media situation in Turkey. In the years since, President Trump's relationship with the media has continued to be perplexing and problematic. Likewise, much has transpired in Turkey on both the domestic and international stage under President Erdogan since our speaker left. So we're very excited to have you back, Mr. Belici, and look at Turkish affairs since 2016. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Just before we start with Mr. Belici, if I can make sure that everybody has themselves muted. In the bottom left corner, you can hit the mute button. Just so I know we don't have any interference, and I know we can set it for everybody but the host to be muted, but sometimes it's easier if we can just get everybody to go ahead and mute themselves. And then following Mr. Belici's discussion, during his discussion as well, if you have any questions for him, we're gonna do questions and answers afterward, but if you can go ahead and type them into the chat. Keith, if you can fix the group chat, it looks like it's set to just go to you, I believe.
Okay, I will. My screen just frozen.
Yes.
I'll try to do my best to fix it.
Okay.
I hope I'll not lose you guys.
Yes. Okay. And so that is the plan. Is typically we have you guys type it into the chat as soon as you can fix this. For at the moment, I believe if you go to chat, it's going to go directly to a Keith. But I will go ahead and welcome everybody in there as soon as that's fixed, just so you're aware. And then I'll go ahead and read the questions to Mr. Belici so that he can then answer them to everybody. And I'm going to do my best to get to all of the questions that are asked. So go ahead, Mr. Belici, if you can. We'd love to hear from you now.
Hello, good evening for everyone from Virginia. Very nice to meet you again, even it is virtual. It's a very nice feeling to be among friends and among the friends of Turkey. It is, maybe we met not just in South Carolina, but maybe in Istanbul during your visits. Unfortunately, Istanbul is a dream city for me now. I don't know if I can go ever back. So we are equal now, almost, maybe, in terms of being away from a very wonderful city. So thank you for World Affairs Council, again, the Columbia World Affairs Council and the Atlantic Institute for giving me that opportunity to share my perspective about what's going on in that beautiful country in last years. So I like to, I guess there has been a lot of introduction about myself, but I can give a few words about my story. I was the editor-in-chief of the largest circulated newspaper until 2016 March. And it is 5 months before this notorious coup. So many people think that Erdogan got mad and started to shut down critical media just after, and as a kind of reaction to the coup attempt, this failed coup attempt, which is not true. So the media, Erdogan started to silence media since 2013, which is the Gezi events, the Gezi protests. And it became harsher after 2013 December, which was the date for the biggest corruption investigation about himself, about his family members, and about his cabinet ministers. So we continued to struggle despite all these pressures for 3 years, from 2013 until 2016 March, as I said. During that time, a lot of journalists were fired, and some other critical TV channels and newspapers were silenced in 2015, and we were under pressure. Our pass cards were revoked. Tax inspectors were regular visitors for our company to put pressure on us. And Erdogan called boycotting the newspaper, not to buy our newspaper. So he was calling the companies not to purchase advertisement from us. So a lot of ways to pressurize us to change our critical position. And of course, court cases. And once I had more than 1,000 court cases against the newspaper, against the reporters, against me. So I was busy with lawyers always to try to defend ourselves. So that continued 3 years, but luckily and fortunately, we did not change our line, but it became impossible for Erdogan to let us continue our critical approach. And in March 2016, I say the nuclear option, Erdogan used this nuclear option to silence us. So what he did was to appoint through some kangaroo courts, some trustees to our board to replace our board members. And then they came with a brutal police raid and they kicked us out from newspaper. The first thing they did was to fire me and then to hire a mouthpiece editor instead of me, and made the newspaper a propaganda outlet in 24 hours. So I was having already threats and a lot of problems, and my phone conversations were, I was feeling that wiretapped, and I was chased wherever I could go in Istanbul. So I was not feeling safe and secure. I tried to go out of country, but I didn't know if I had a valid passport. So my only chance was to go to airport and try. So I went to airport and bought a flight ticket just 2 hours before the flight time, in the mid time at 3 a.m. In Istanbul time. I left country. Luckily, there was no restriction in my passport at that time, or they were sleeping. I don't know why they let me go out still. So I went to Europe and then realized that my family did not have a visa for Europe. And then they had a visa that we got maybe 5-6 years ago in normal times to America. So they were able to come to America, and I flew to America, and we were united. So this is my story, which is beginning of my exiled career or exiled life in America. So since then, of course, there has been a lot of tragic things. The most important thing is the coup attempt in July 2016, which changed things further in terms of quality of democracy, press freedom, human rights, and everything, rule of law. And I was not in Turkey while that event was happening. Of course, I was watching closely. And since then, I am following what and how it happened and how it changed Turkey, maybe forever. I'm not sure now if we can go back to pre-coup times, because Erdogan is using and has been using this coup to create an autocracy. And the coup helped only one person in Turkey. It did not help journalists, of course. It did not help opposition. It did not help the civil servants, anyone, but it helped a lot to Erdogan. Erdogan had an idea of turning Turkey's political system into an executive presidency, like in America. But he was not able to convince people, including his base, his constituency. But the coup gave him this chance of, I mean, with the fear of the coup and with the things after the coup, he was able to create and change the Turkey's political system. And he made himself the president. And of course, the powers of the parliament reduced dramatically. And he made himself in a position to appoint almost all members of judiciary, especially the highest courts, like the Constitutional Court or Court of Appeals, etc. And of course, the most important thing that is very much related to my area, he shut down more than 200 critical media outlets. So these are radio stations, TV channels, newspapers like my newspaper, Zaman, and news agencies. With that, I mean, he became, he started to control 95% of media, which is a huge propaganda machine that will affect all the policies in Turkey. Because it is an important tool when you control that amount of media, it becomes an important tool to brainwash people, to demonize your enemies, anyone you like. So now this is where we are. Of course,
Mr. Village, if you
yes.
don't mind, there is a minute, like a very short video showing the confiscation of your newspaper. Also, you are seen in that video. Can I just screen share with that everyone for a minute, if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course. That will
Okay.
that will help for better understanding.
Okay. So let me just make sure that we share.
So this is the raid to our newspaper, correct?
Yes.
Yes, in March 2016.
I assume, hold on 1 second. YouTube. I can get. Are you able to see it now?
Yes, yes, I see.
Okay, good.
Turkish police have bombarded hundreds of protesters with tear gas and rubber bullets in an attempt to disperse crowds outside the Zaman newspaper offices in Istanbul. The country's top-selling newspaper reopened on Saturday following a state takeover and police raid, but the staff has experienced a shake-up with reports of an editor-in-chief and a columnist being sacked. A top editor at Zaman's sister publication, Today's Zaman, labelled it a dark day for Turkish democracy and said most media in the country were not providing full coverage of the takeover through fear of experiencing the same fate. A state-appointed trusteeship has now been ordered to take over both newspapers and the Cihan News Agency, all of which have ties to a US-based cleric who the government accuses of plotting a coup. The incident at Zaman has further heightened concerns about press freedom in Turkey. We're all humans after all, and every human being matters, says this newspaper reader. Different opinions should be voiced in society. That's my opinion. A single voice does not mean anything. So we came here to show different voices and to support Zaman newspaper. This is not the country we were hoping for. We're concerned. Rights groups and European officials have also criticised the takeover, while the US State Department labelled it the latest in a series of troubling judicial actions taken by the Turkish government.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, each time when I see that video, it revives my, I mean, feelings, and
never before in American history,
which is not that positive, of course.
exactly like this,
But I like to indeed today share story of two Ahmeds. You know, instead of sharing all these figures and the information that you can indeed download or find in even Wikipedia or international media, but I like to highlight two persons' stories that tells about what is going on in current Turkey. That will be very helpful. Mr. Akif, if you can share in the screen to Ahmet's picture, that will help.
Okay, let me just work on that one. You can actually continue. I'll tell you when it's ready.
So these are, one Ahmet is a journalist who was born in 1950 and who was a very prominent journalist, and he was defending democracy and human rights since he became an active journalist and an intellectual. And and of course he has been subject of persecution during all his life, and started with an article he wrote in 1995 with the headline of Atatürk. So you know Atatürk is the founder of modern Turkey, and Turkey has one of the biggest problem is the Kurdish problem. And Ahmet Altan, this Ahmet, one of the first Ahmets that I will try to highlight a little bit tonight. So he put that headline to his article to invite Turkish people to make little empathy. What could happen if Atatürk was Atakürt? So Turkey was controlled by Kurds, and the Turks' rights, cultural rights were denied, and has been lots of persecution against this minority group. So because of that, he was fired from the newspaper Milliyet. And in 2007, yes, of course, from the age you can understand that I'm talking about the Ahmet journalist on the left side of the screen. So in 2007, Ahmet Altan established a newspaper, a new newspaper, which is called Taraf, and it was a very strong supporter of Turkey's real democratization. So in those years, there was a big struggle between the establishment, the secularist establishment in Turkey, and the AKP, Erdogan's party. So Erdogan's party was trying to democratize and to make Turkey a member of European Union, for instance, but the military establishment, the judiciary establishment were not happy with Erdogan becoming powerful and making Turkey a better democracy. So there has been several coup attempts against AK Party and against Erdogan in those years. We are talking about now 2007. And Ahmet Altan's newspaper's main mission was to fight against these attempts against democracy, and a big supporter of Erdogan's reforms in those days. And in 2007, for instance, I mean, he was supporting the rights of Kurds, rights of minorities, and the press freedoms, of course. And in 2008, he wrote an article dedicated to the victims of Armenian genocide. And because of that, he had this court case against him by the judiciary establishment. They said this is against the Turkishness of the state. So this was one of the articles in the penal code. So he was sued. But of course, time passed, and Erdogan was able to get rid of this attempt against his party and against himself. For instance, in 2008, there was again by the judiciary, by the establishment, to close down his party in 2008. And of course, Ahmet Altan was very big supporter of Erdogan against that attempt as well. So with very, with very narrow margin, Erdogan was able to save his political career and his party with the support of liberals and Democrats like Ahmet Altan. But when in 2013, AKP, Erdogan made a U-turn from democracy to an autocracy. I mean, harshly attacking protesters in Gezi events, the protests, and silencing and jailing journalists and the judges and prosecutors in the aftermath of the corruption investigation in the same year. Ahmet Altan, of course, was not a person to accept this authoritarian tendency and the corruption. He became a critical voice, one of the strongest voices against Erdogan this time. And of course, in that struggle, we were almost in the same fronts, fighting against a new Erdogan, which is not pushing Turkey towards democracy, but towards a one-man rule. And of course, that continued. And in 2016, this notorious coup happened. And in September, they arrested Ahmet Altan. And with the claim that Ahmet Altan gave subliminal, I don't know if you can understand with my little broken English, subliminal messages to support coup and coup attempt. So this was a ridiculous charge, of course. There was a TV program that he was talking about his traditional and democratic views, but this was seen as a kind of attempt to support the coup. And as a result, Ahmet Altan got life sentence in 2018 for this. And of course, he became a novelist, a columnist, an important political, intellectual figure. And in 2019, the appeal court changed his case, changed his sentence from life sentence to 10 years. And they decided that he should be free. He should be released. And they released him. The courts released him after serving until 2019 in jail, while I was in America in exile. But when Ahmet Altan got out, he wrote an article about one of his cellmates, who was a teacher and who was a relative of Fethullah Gülen, who lives in Pennsylvania. So just because of that article, very much supportive of his, of course, story and the persecution of his cellmate, the courts changed their decision and re-arrested Ahmet Altan. So Ahmet Altan now is in jail again, serving to complete his 10 years term. So the other story of Ahmet, of course, the other Ahmet is not a journalist, is not an intellectual, as you can understand from his photo, but he is a son of a family who became victims of the purges after 2016 coup, the coup attempt. So both his dad and mom were arrested for being affiliated or associated with the Hizmet movement, with the Gülen movement, and they were charged as being members of a terrorist group because the Erdogan government labeled the Gülen movement and Fethullah Gülen himself as a terrorist group, and then whoever is affiliated, then they were charged with the same sentence. And Ahmet's father and mother were in jail, and they left there. At that time, he was 6 years old. Ahmet was a 6 years old kid to their granddads and grandmoms. But he became cancer, Ahmet. And after a lot of pressures, they released Ahmet's mom. The cancer getting so rapid and so bad, and it became almost incurable. in Turkey under the Turkey's health facilities, and the doctors said that it's better for Ahmet to go Germany for a better treatment. So the mom, who recently released from jail, again dad is in, the father is in jail, continues to serve his term, and the Erdogan government did not let mom and to go with his with her son to Germany. And why? Because their passports were revoked, and it took months to get a permission from this from the government of Erdogan. Finally, they got this permission after huge protest in the social media, especially. So he went to first, of course, did not, since it took a long time to take that permission for his mom. So he went alone to Germany for treatment. Can you imagine the 8 years old kid and fighting with cancer? And later they let mom to go to his to her son, and then the treatment did not help, and they had to turn back to Turkey. And there has been a huge tragedy of Ahmet being in intensive care unit, and lots of again cries from the social media to let him to meet his dad and to get his support in that fight against cancer. So unfortunately, there are, I mean, very emotional conversations. The prosecutors were not letting Ahmet's dad to visit him in hospital. Instead, they were letting him to talk, and there are lots of records of that conversation between the two. And when at the late hours of Ahmet, a lot of people again urged the prosecutors to let father to come and to see last time his son, but they didn't. And Ahmet died in prison without being able to meet his father. And finally, in his funeral, the prosecutors let him to go, at least to participate to his funeral. But still, after funeral, he went to his cell, to his jail. So that indeed tells, in my view, I mean, this is a political person, an intellectual's story, and a regular person's, a kid's story of persecution about post-coup Turkey, how it is and what happens. Of course, in that story, it says, I mean, we should understand that it is not limited to just two persons, of course. I have more than 30 of my friends, some columnists, some reporters, even my chief designer is in jail, serving again 10 years sentence.
Chief designer,
if we can share the figures of the purges, Akif Bey, so you can see the dramatic statistics. I mean, I like you to think about those statistics, that the Ahmet stories are just two of these hundreds and thousands of people. So you can see, and this is, I took it from a website which covers the post-coup purges in Turkey. So as you see, more than 130,000 people fired from public service. These are judges, police officers, nurses, doctors. I mean, imagine. And 50,000 of people were arrested as part of the post-coup purges. As you see, 2,000 schools, more than 2,000 schools and dormitories were shut down because of their affiliation with the Hizmet movement. And more than 7,000 academics were purged and fired, some of them jailed, some of them were able to get out of country, and some of them are now doing some petty things, like selling baklavas or some other items to survive. Because those people who are purged or fired, the government doesn't allow them to take any position in any normal job. So it's kind of, they are forcing them to almost starvation. So you can imagine that a figure which was striking about this tells a lot about the scope of the persecution. Minister of Interior said that there has been 500,000 arrests who were with the claim that they were part of or affiliated with the Hizmet movement. Of course, these people, what is the evidence against them? They were sending their kids to the Hizmet-related schools, or they were depositing money to the Hizmet-related company or bank, or they were our readers. So these were enough to claim and to sue that many people as members of a terrorist organization that in their life did not do anything violent. And they were most peaceful people of the society. Of course, the persecution is not limited just to the Gulen people or the Hizmet people. It is targeting anyone who is not obeying, not accepting Erdogan's rule. Let me just give one figure. You know, in 2019, there has been a local election, and a lot of municipalities were won controlled by the Kurdish party. It's called HDP. So out of 65 mayors that were elected just 1 year ago, 45 of them were purged, fired from their positions, and government appointed some people, some employees, civil servants to their place. And some of those mayors are serving jail terms, like the mayor of Diyarbakir, very prominent city. And the leader of that party is in jail. There are more than 10 MPs, parliamentarians in jail. So it is that there are intellectuals who has nothing to do with the ideas of Fethullah Gülen are in jail just because of their affiliation with the Kurdish movement or liberal or leftist movement. So that is where we are now. And I just want to, what is the reaction of Turkish society, Turkish people to all these persecution? Of course, there are a lot of things to say about that, but I will share a last public poll results, that how Erdogan is doing still, despite all this persecution and all the problems related to the quality of democracy and rule of law. So, Akif, if you can share this poll picture, I can say some words about that. So this is a poll which was published this month, June 2020, and they asked if there is an election on Sunday, which party you would support. So the respondents said, as you see, 30% supporting AK Party. The main opposition party is getting 21.7%, and this HDP, the Kurdish party, is getting 8%. So these are the results. But I would say some important thing about that, which is, despite all that dark picture, gives me little hope. It is the figure that you see as 30% support for Erdogan and his party was 45% or 50%. For instance, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. But it is down now from 50% to 30%. This is very important. And as you, if you can keep it, actually, and there is a, this is an important sign that this dictatorship Erdogan is established or trying to establishing. So as you can see here, this DEVA and Gelecek, so these are almost having over 1.3% support. These are the parties established by Erdogan, Erdogan's members, former allies. So the DEVA is established by economy minister, who is a very prominent figure, who was very successful as a minister in the good times, Ali Babacan. And the other one, the Gelecek, which means future party, it is established by the former chairman of AKP and the prime minister of Erdogan. And these parties, especially the first one, is supported by the former president Abdullah Gül, who was an ally of Erdogan. So these are
saying these two parties are really part of this?
So these are two important signs that yes, Turkey lost. I mean, we lost our democracy to a large extent. So I mean, many people are calling it already a dictatorship. It is at least we can say it is in that direction. But Erdogan's support is not increasing; it is decreasing. But of course, the foundations of democracy destroyed. There is no independent judiciary. There is no free media to tell that story to people. But despite all these pressures, so Erdogan's allies are leaving and forming their own parties.
I think those two parties
this is also another
former allies of Erdogan.
But no.
another positive sign in my view. And there has been an important I mean, concrete positive development last year. There was a local election, as I said, while I was referring to the Kurdish mayors sacked by Erdogan. First time after maybe 18 years, Erdogan lost the local elections in two biggest cities, Istanbul and Ankara. And I can share their figures in 2019, last year's elections. Erdogan was represented, or his party was represented by his former prime minister, but was able to get only 44%. But the opposition candidate, Ekrem İmamoğlu, got 54%. So when you consider Istanbul with 15 million population representing almost all Turkey, that is very important sign, or at least one of the little signs that makes me a little optimistic in looking at the future of Turkey. But of course, that was only possible, as you see, Turkish political spectrum is very much fragmented. But first time they were able to come together, the Kurdish one, some nationalists, some conservatives, and some social democrats, leftist political parties. When they were able to come together, they won very important electoral successes. But of course, even if Turkish people change their mind, will they be able to get rid of AKP or Erdogan? It is an open question. I mean, in my view, and this may be a concluding remark before getting your questions, Erdogan since 2013 is staying in power by destroying democracy, by destroying rule of law, and by doing a lot of crimes. In this COVID-19 crisis, for instance, a lot of countries released their, people in jail, just because to protect them, their lives. But for instance, what Erdogan did, he released 90,000 people, among them lots of criminals and thefts, lots of people with important crimes, but left the journalists, intellectuals, academics, teachers in jail. So that shows the attitude. I mean, even some mafia bosses, the gangsters, were released, but not journalists and intellectuals. So Erdogan stays in power, as I said, by destroying rule of law and democracy, and it is almost impossible for him to accept a peaceful change of power, because he knows that when he goes, he will be prosecuted, and he will have very harsh prison years waiting for him and his family and his cabinet ministers. So that is the biggest risk for the country, for Turkey. In that perspective, and there are, as I said, some positive changes, declining support to him, and some positive movements in the opposition. But will he let a smooth, peaceful transition to go back to normal and to end this persecution of millions of people? It is not clear yet. I mean, we could go to a full-fledged dictatorship without any election, without any freedoms to anyone whatsoever. So I can maybe conclude with that remarks and leave the floor to you to your questions.
Thank you very much. I think the big thing that we all might get is that there is now, because we're experiencing a new normal of what we're trying to figure out life is like, and so Turkey has been living in this new normal for 4 years, even though it's really not anything pleasant to live in. We have one question so far from Mitch. He said, Merhaba, Nasılsın? I would love to hear your opinion on recent developments of reinstatement and rearming of militia. Bekçi, would you, no, hold on, we have no one more that comes in. Would you be able to shed insight on AKP's desire to have one and the CHP's opposition suspecting a loyal militia to oppressive regime? Ibrahim Kaboglu has been very vocal in this regard. Do you see the efficacy of either group's opinion? And do you fear even further restriction of individual rights, especially speech and government criticism? Teşekkürler Erdem.
I thank you for the question. I mean, for 5-6 years, it is very clear that Erdogan changed his direction from a European Union or democracy-oriented country into an authoritarian one. That is very clear. And in that regard, Iran is a good example, one of the examples they follow, and they are inspired. If you Google, you could find a Human Rights Watch report that maybe 5-6 years ago, Erdogan inspired to change Turkish intelligence service in the image, in the model of the Iranian intelligence apparatus or the system. So there are lots of those parallels. You know, when you look at the controlling 95% of media, and with that, when you look at this, even in TV serials, they are making a propaganda as if Erdogan is reviving Ottoman Empire back to its power, and he seems and portrays himself as the one of the last sultans. And there are lots of referrals in those TV serials which are very popular and very important in shaping and changing people's minds. So in my view, these bekçi, you know, these are security people that will take care of streets, especially in the neighborhoods, next to the police. In my view, this is very much identical to the Besics. If you know the Iranian system, the Besics have been in the function of controlling any anti-revolutionary effort in localities. So if there is any protest by the Iranian people, the Besics are within community to suppress in the name of Iranian regime. So I think there has been a lot of progress in terms of Erdogan and AKP establishing a kind of autocracy in the model of Syrian regime or the Iranian regime or other regimes, because this is also very much understandable from the perspective of the Islamist ideology. Wherever Islamist ideology comes to power, in Sudan, in Afghanistan, in Iran, or wherever, they come to power by defending democracy, but when they control power, they don't let other people to be represented in the system. So this is the genetic, this is the formation of the ideology itself, unfortunately. So it's not open for democracy. So the Islamist ideology is democrat while weak, while in opposition, but when it grasps power, it doesn't let democracy to function for the benefit of other people, other perspectives.
Mr. Bilgi, can I just intervene to make a comment over here to make sure that there is no misunderstanding? Could you please clarify what you mean with Islamist ideology?
Yeah, I mean, this is very important indeed. I finished just an article about the experience of Sudan under Islamism, which came to power with a coup in 1989 and ended last year with widespread popular protests under the leadership of Ömer Beşir, who is indicted by the war crime tribunal for war crimes and genocide against people of Darfur. So this ideology is different from Islam, of course. There are 1.5 billion Muslims, but the Islamist ideology, the political Islamist ideology, is coming from, it's a kind of modern, we can say, ideology, and it defends an opinion that you need to take control of the state power, government power, and then impose your understanding of religion, in that sense, Islam, upon society. So when you look at what's happening and what happened in Iran, what happened in Sudan, what happened in Afghanistan, and now what's happening in Turkey, which is sharing the same ideology, they like to shape people through education, They like to shape people through the media and even through films and TV serials. And in that ideology, you have two options. It is not compatible. Islam, in my view, is compatible with democracy, but Islamism is not. Because in Islamism, if you are in power, you offer two options for the rest of the people in any country. You either obey and become part of the club, or you reject it and then face the consequences, like my position, like Ahmed Altan's position. Even if you are Muslim, even if you are a pious Muslim, you don't have any voice because you are considered rebel or kind of protester to the system, and there is no place for opposition, no legitimate place, even if, as I said, you are pious Muslim. So that is the ideology that I try to refer.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification too, Akif. We have another question that came in from Dixon Monk. He said, today, Turkish courts sentenced Metin Tupaz, a U.S. consulate worker accused of ties to Gulen, to 8 years and 9 months in prison, despite U.S. embassy. Could you speak briefly on current U.S.-Turkish relations, especially between its leaders, and the impact of this sentencing? And in light of global protests calling for social equality, could you say a few words about issues surrounding the status of the Kurdish people in Turkey?
So it's a nice question, but a big question. To answer, I need a lot of time, but I can summarize what I would say. This is not the first time that Erdogan accused some American citizens for being part of the Gülen movement or Hizmet movement. There has been a lot of investigations going on against very prominent American intellectuals and American citizens, and the consulate employee is just one of them. Before that, you would remember a pastor, Pastor Brunson, who is from California, Carolina. I don't know if he was from South or North.
He was from North Carolina, Pastor Brunson.
Pastor Brunson was living in Turkey for over 20 years, and he was a peaceful resident, a legal resident. But the Erdogan judiciary and the media demonized him as a person for being behind the coup. And if you look at the Erdogan's media's records on him, they were saying that he was promised to be the chief of CIA if coup was successful. So he was in jail for 2 years, despite these nonsense accusations. So he would stay in jail for years. But the American administration sanctioned 2 ministers, the interior minister and justice ministers of Erdogan. After that, before that sanctions, Erdogan was promising to his base, to his constituency, that this guy is a coup plotter and will never get out of prison as far as I stay as president of Turkey. But after the sanctions, Erdogan made a U-turn, and maybe in a couple of days or weeks, he was released and he was taken to America. Now he's free and he's writing his memoirs. Maybe he finished writing what kind of persecution he went through and his experience as a minister and as a jailed person with these nonsense accusations. So this tells a lot about the type of relationship that now we have. Now, Turkey is a member of NATO, and you expect to have very good relations between two countries. But Erdogan is buying Russian missiles as a kind of despite all the warnings from NATO and from America, and jailing even American citizens, and doing a lot of using those things for bargaining chip. This is what I think he's doing, and of course there are lots of tragic pages in that regard. The Pastor Brunson and this consulate employee are just two of the strange examples. I mean, the problem with this consulate employee, he's not an American. I mean, if he was an American, I guess Trump will put sanctions to him about him as well. So that is the unfortunate nature of the relations between Turkey and its Western democratic allies. When you look at European countries or America, they are not much focused on turning Turkey back to normal democracy. So they focus on their short-term interests, like releasing an American citizen from prison is an important achievement, which is not. There are more than 50,000 similar people in jail. So this is my perspective. I say that Turkey has been and still is part of the democratic world, and the democratic world should not shy to be critical of destruction of democracy in Turkey under Erdogan. But what the American government, the current administration, and the European governments are doing, I mean, they just ignore a lot of wild things happening that I underlined some of them in Turkey. And this is not limited to, this is not specific to this administration, the Trump administration. Even during, I mean, my newspaper was silenced during the Obama administration. He was the president. So, I mean, this is a pity for me, because I came from a country where democracy destroyed to a country that a lot of people are concerned about the future of democracy. So I'm not in a way to expect a lot of things from our allies, democratic allies, including America.
The second part of the question was, in light of the global protests calling for social equality, could you say a few words about the issues surrounding the status of the Kurdish people in Turkey?
Yeah, I underlined little in my introduction. The Kurds can be considered as the blacks of Turkey. There has been, they have been denied of their identity since the beginning of the republic, because the republic was founded on the Turkish nationalism, the idea of Turkish nationalism and the secularism, which was borrowed from European nationalisms of the time. And the Kurds were considered as mountain Turks, for instance. This was one of the official reference to their identity. So they have been persecuted badly for decades. And because of that persecution, there has been the emergence of PKK, which uses violence and terror as a tactic, which makes people like me, which puts people like me in a difficult position. I empathize with Kurdish people's rights, but as a person who is against violence in the name of anything, even in the name of religion or Islam, I cannot accept violence. So that's a big challenge, of course, for all Turkish Democrats. But when you remember the figures that I mentioned, just last year there has been 65 mayors elected in Kurdish, mainly Kurdish cities, and 45 of them were sacked, fired by Erdogan government. And the party, this is the third biggest party. If you remember the poll, still third biggest party in Turkey. Who is leader is in jail, Selahattin Demirtas. So there has been some improvements, of course. In 1980s, even speaking Kurdish was not allowed. It was prohibited. Now they are able at least to speak their language, but there are lots of things to do. And unfortunately, since Erdogan allied, Erdogan had an alliance with Democrats and with the Hizmet movement in good times, when Turkey was a model of democracy, rising star in the world. Now Erdogan switched to another alliance with ultra-nationalists and the fascists, which hate both Hizmet movement and the Kurdish people. So that is the dilemma now Turkey is facing. So when I look at what's happening in America after George Floyd protests, and unfortunately I can't see the parallels. So I see that the whites and blacks are protesting together, and a lot of protests are in a peaceful way. But the MPs, the elected members of Kurdish party, just this week were sacked and jailed. But there has been no such protest from the Turkish society. That is, I mean, by Kurds and by Turks at the same time. When George Floyd passed away in a very bad way, a wild way. So this week, one day after the funeral, his brother was in Congress in a hearing about reforming judiciary and the police laws in America. So I don't see such parallels. Of course, I understand the pessimism of Americans because of what you are, and what we now. Of course, I am also part of American society now. I am also maybe in fringes yet, in the margins. But I understand this pessimism because of the things that are happening, not promising. This attack, the regular attack against the media, and against the challenges to independence of judiciary. These are not promising signs, of course, but still America is much more progressive, and the American history and American democracy is much, much deeper than ours, which gives me more optimism about the future of democracy in this country. I mean, don't forget, and I tell that to my Turkish audience, we did not have a fight, a war for a value in our history. We had a lot of wars. Our grandparents made wars to conquer Istanbul, for instance. Turkish people are very, very successful warriors in history. But we don't have a war like the Civil War that Americans had. You had in your history. Just this is more than 1 million people lost just to support or for a difference of opinion on a value, whether the black people, African Americans, should continue to be slaves or that should be stopped. So these are very important differences when I compare two countries. And I mean, this is my very maybe emotional, but my feelings from my heart, that I like and I love that American democracy can survive, because this is one of the very important hope for a lot of people around the world who are inspired for their democratic struggle. I mean,
Yeah, I can totally see that too. I know it's been a long 4 years for a lot of the Turkish community, and whenever I talk with anybody from the Turkish community, I always ask them, how's their family back home? You know, how is everybody doing? Because I think for some of us, it would be hard to think that for 4 years, nobody's been able to leave, or nobody's had a bank account, or they've had their assets frozen, and for such a length of time, you know, and so Reverend Finklia here, she is asking, you know, where are you seeing signs of hope? You know, so that was our last question that was asked. And so I think it would be a great thing for us to sum this up on that question, on where are you seeing some signs of hope for Turkey? We know
Yeah.
I most likely I can't visit, and I would love to go back and see Turkey. There's plenty of us here that have been to Turkey that probably can't go and visit. We know that it's all changed and it's all different, and we're kind of just sitting and waiting. And so we're just wondering, where are there signs of hope that some sense of the normal that we remembered will be restored?
Yeah, you know, some of the points I already underlined, that what makes me somehow optimistic, that the declining support to Erdogan, despite all
Yes.
total control almost of the media and the state apparatus, and the very important prominent members of his party leaving and forming their own parties. Opposition is learning some of their mistakes that they did in the past and achieving some of the very, very concrete and successful results, like the Istanbul and Ankara municipalities. But of course, I force myself to be optimistic because I cannot survive otherwise. But things are horrible. You know, every day when I wake up, I check the news and I see another tragedy. You know, just this week, for instance, 63 people were arrested in one province of Turkey, and it was very brutal police raid, as the brutal police raid to our newspaper. And the accusation for those 63 people, there are babies, children, elderly, women. The accusation was they were supporting relatives of purged people or jailed people. Can you imagine? This is the last tragedy that I had. And another one, you know, I had a reporter in one of the provinces of Turkey who was arrested in 2018, whose name is Mevlut. So who was serving his jail time, but he got cancer while he was in jail. And his family and his daughters are crying through social media that, I mean, this is not acceptable. Let us to be together in the maybe last days of our father, who is charged with ridiculous accusations. This is a reporter, and he's linked to the Gülen movement, and then he becomes a terrorist. You know, this week, the family forced the hospital to give a report that the prison is not a good place for this journalist. And they got the doctors, the brave doctors, despite all these things, gave a report saying that this person should be at home or in a hospital. But what happened? What Erdogan courts decided? They decided no. They rejected the doctor's report, and now still in jail. So each day when I look at my Twitter timeline, I see that his daughter at 12 years and 22 years old daughters are tweeting about that. So how I can be optimistic? You know, I mean, I try to, as I said, force myself to be optimistic because a lot of people are looking at us because I was the editor-in-chief of the largest newspaper, and I need to stay hopeful, optimistic, and believe that things will change, will improve. And you know, when you look at the full side of the glass, when I look at that, I see that Turkey had almost those turmoils. in every 10 years, we had interventions, kind of military coups, and Turkey learned to get rid of that legacy, but was not able to sustain it. This is our sickness. This is our illness. So I was supporting Turkey to become European Union member just because of that idea, that to get rid of these interventions each 10 years. But of course, Turkish people are, it's a bad thing, but accustomed to revive from those kind of terrible experiences. This is an important thing. The second thing is, of course, there is a 200 years of struggle for democracy, for modernization, for secularization in Turkey, and this is, you cannot erase it just in 5 years or in 10 years, whatever your power is. So Turkish people, at least half of the Turkish people, rejecting strongly Turkey turning into another Syria or another Iran or North Korea. That makes me also hopeful. Of course, Turkey is part of the Western alliance still. I mean, it's part of NATO, part of European Council, a lot of institutions, although they are not functioning as I expect them to function to fix Turkey's destruction of democracy. And of course, other than that, I mean, I read one of the books that I read after in my exiled life was the autobiography of Mandela. So anyone who did not read it yet, those in Corona times, we have a lot of time. I recommend highly you to read. So I got a lot of hope from that. You know, the Mandela was the leader of the blacks, the persecuted people in Africa, in South Africa, and he was in jail for 27 years before he became the leader of emancipation of millions of people. And now South Africa, sorry, is a good example, and Mandela is a shining star in my view. So I try to get a lot of hopes from those kind of figures like the Dr. King or Gandhi or Fethullah Gülen. You know, he is in his 80s. When I first know him, it was mid-80s, and he was persecuted in the 80 coup, in the 1980 coup, and he was in hiding in Turkey at that time for 6 years. So now when I look at retrospectively to Fethullah Gülen, you know, the Mandela passed away, Gandhi passed away, Dr. King passed away, but I see Fethullah Gülen is a still living example of how you can keep your hope. You know, when I met him, it was my 20s. He was in his 50s, but he was able to inspire millions of people in Turkey and around the world for peaceful causes. So there are very important figures in every society that we can benefit. Of course, lastly, I have a strong belief of the power of truth. I believe that the truth will prevail. I mean, you can fool some people for some time, but not every people every time. So this is what I think. So we should believe in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is now already almost 8:30. Thank you very much, Mr. Bellucci, for taking the time tonight to sit and speak with us and share. I know so many of us have some strong ties to Turkey, and our heart goes out to everybody that's over there. and all the persecution that they're going through in their families. You know, do you have a last minute thought on what Turkey would be like after Erdogan? That was one last question that was just asked, and I thought I could just ask real quick, and then we can go ahead and rest for the night.
So when I compare with our other periods of anti-democratic times, like the military interventions I referred, there is an important difference. What is this difference? So these military coups were led by elites, by establishment, by some marginal people, let's say. But the first time we are witnessing an authoritarianism supported by millions of people. So this is called populist authoritarianism. So this is witnessed in Germany for these famous, infamous Hitler times. But this is first time we are experiencing it. So I'm not sure, and the past, our history does not give me a lot of clues because of that difference. So if it was another authoritarianism by a military junta, I would say we can overcome and we can continue. But when I compare, with what's happening now, which makes me more concerned and sometimes frustrated, because there is the example of Iran. You know, I mean, in Iran, although now, last time I spoke to an open-minded Iranian who was telling me that 70% of Iranian people are against the regime, but they don't have the tool to get rid of him, to get rid of the regime. Because the regime established with all its mechanisms, with its security, with its intelligence, with its army, with its economy, etc., with its control over information. So it is not easy, even if the Iranians change their mind, to get rid of such a authoritarian regime. So that makes me little, indeed not little, very pessimistic. I mean, if Erdogan is able to create whatever system in his image, in his mind, that would be notorious. And it will not be easy to change it. That is the miscalculation of our Western democratic allies. You know, they considered Erdogan a pragmatic person. They can make bargaining, and they can have good relations, and ignore what he is doing in terms of the sociological transformation of the country. So there has been 5-6 years already lost with that miscalculation. So every day Erdogan is establishing his crazy autocracy, and getting a lot of support from even the former members of the establishment, quote unquote white people, because he gives good money, or he uses carrot and stick tactic very successfully. Some people are feared with prison, and some people are co-opted. I mean, when there's a very interesting figure I try to follow, a professor who was teaching at a university in United Kingdom, became a chief advisor of Erdogan, and still a chief advisor. And he's a secular, modern lady. There is nothing Islamist about this lady. But now she's at the palace. She's co-opted, and she was last year in an interview with BBC, who told the journalist, sorry, that there is no journalist in jails of Turkey. Can you imagine? When you look at simple reports, it will say that Turkey is the worst jailer of journalists. There are more than 150 journalists in jail. Can you imagine a secular, modern professor being co-opted and then saying that blunt lie on an interview on at BBC? So that potential of people to be co-opted is, I mean, scary for me.
Yeah.
And I see
certainly.
examples of that in this country too, which is very much disappointing. You know, one of the last news in American media was about the General Flynn, who was the national security advisor of Trump, who was in a meeting with ministers of Erdogan in New York to kidnap Fethullah Gülen from Pennsylvania. Can you imagine a general is doing that just for being paid by a dictator? So, I mean, that is something, I mean, when I see what's happening in Turkey, and when I look at here, I mean, that's a very big point of concern for me. And this people's, of course, that we have a lot of brave people who are losing their positions and saying truth. But there are other examples as well. So this is an ongoing struggle that will continue.
Yes, it certainly sounds like it. It certainly sounds like it's still going to continue, and we hope, we have no clue when the end will come and what it will look like then. But we thank you very much, Mr. Bellici, for sharing and spending time with us tonight to go over and discuss the current state and what we have to learn and look forward to, and even the comparison to our own government and what we have going on over here. Thank you very much. Steve, did you have something?
I mean, I hope if my optimism is validated, and then I can go back to Turkey, we start Zaman again, and then you become my guests.
Yes, we hope that too. I know when I visited Zaman when I was in Turkey, it was wonderful. It was a wonderful place to visit. So we thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bellici, and thank you all of our guests. I see the friends over here, your faces. The only thing I'm missing with you guys, I wish that you have this beautiful baklava. I'm kind of shy to eat this baklava in front of you.
Oh, that is just not fair.
It is some kind of jealous, right, guys? You know, for you.
He's in New York.
I see you
Columbia's
have
the host.
too.
Yeah, I mean, try to sometimes sneak, like, just turn off the camera and eat my baklava, you know, but I wish that part of the hospitality is, you know, hospitality, one thing that we really truly miss it, you know, the Turkish hospitality,
University of South Carolina,
you know, everything. And so through our trips when we went to Turkey,
press, what do you call it, newspaper journalism, School of Journalism sponsoring. This guy was basically
I wish that we had really this opportunity to get together in person, to have Turkish tea and baklava, and hopefully we'll have this in Turkey sometime. I'm truly kind of Phyllis, by the way, thank you for the last question. You know, he was the former senator, South Carolina senator, but Phil Leventis. So I think I personally, I'm very hopeful. Even though I know that what Mr. Bellici says, it's difficult, where Erdogan really established, you know, all the foundations for his lifetime serving in Turkey with his family, even though. But when I look at the history, I feel that there is no need to lose the hope. And especially living in the United States and being aware of the US history and the awareness of the US people over here gives me a lot of hope. Because I know that we have a lot of things going on here in a very negative way. But I always give the example, the Americans are the fierce defender of democracy, and they have great hope. And that's kind of really giving me hope too, being among, and now I'm an American too, because as a citizen and I established my life over here. But I kind of definitely feel we will see those days again. in Turkey and hopefully in every other part of the world, Syria, Afghanistan, wherever it is. So the darkness will not, survive for eternal, but there will be an end to the darkness in everywhere sometime. Thanks so much for everyone joining tonight. Dick, again, thanks so much for partnering with us, World Affairs Council of Colombia. That's great to work with you guys. And again, I hope to get together with all of you sometime soon to kind of celebrate our friendship with Turkish tea and baklava.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Have a good
thanks
evening.
a lot for
Thanks so
everyone.
much. Y'all have a great evening.
Thank you.
Mr.
Have a great evening. Teşekkürler Erdem.
Good evening. See you in Istanbul.
See you.